I always thought trust was something unbreakable between a father and daughter. That summer, I learned it could be tested in ways I never imagined. My name is Haley. I was 23 when everything changed. After finishing my final year of university, I returned home to spend the summer at my father's lake house. Nestled among pine trees and overlooking still, dark water, the place had always been a sanctuary. But sanctuaries can become cages when the wrong people are invited. And my dad, Richard, was a respected contractor, disciplined, dependable, and deeply trusting. Since my mother left us when I was 13, he had done everything he could to fill the gaps. We weren't just father and daughter, we were best friends. Or at least, we had been. It was early June when he mentioned his old college buddies would be joining us for a weekend reunion. I remembered them vaguely from childhood birthdays and barbecues, Tom, Mark, and Steven. They used to seem like uncles, loud, funny, generous with gifts. But when they arrived that Friday afternoon, something felt different. Tom, the ringleader of the trio, stepped out of his glossy black SUV like a man still clinging to his youth. In his mid-50s, he wore his confidence like cologne, overpowering, and impossible to ignore. His eyes locked on me immediately, and his smile stretched just a little too long. "Haley," he said, pulling me into a hug that lingered at the waist. "You've grown into a stunning young woman." Mark followed, a bit younger and flashier. Gold watch, slicked back hair, a loud laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Your dad didn't tell us we'd be sharing the house with a model," he joked, bumping elbows with Tom. Steven was the last to step in. He didn't speak much, didn't joke. He just stared. Observant, measured. There was something unreadable about him, which somehow felt more unnerving than the others' overt flirtation. Dad didn't notice. He was too busy firing up the grill, pouring beers, and reliving old stories like no time had passed. I stayed quiet, helping in the kitchen, glancing through the window at the three men laughing on the patio. They were comfortable. Too comfortable. Like this wasn't a visit, like they'd been waiting to come back. That night, the air hung thick with smoke and laughter. We sat by the fire pit as the sun slipped behind the lake. Dad insisted I stay up with them. "These guys are family," he said, handing me a glass of wine. "You'll have fun." At first, it felt harmless. We talked about school, work, life, after graduation. But the questions started to shift. More personal, more intrusive. "Got a boyfriend, Haley?" Tom asked, his voice coded in something more than curiosity. "Anyone keeping you up at night?" Mark added, his eyes low on my legs. I gave vague answers, laughed them off, but their eyes didn't waver. Steven, still silent, never stopped watching, like he was reading a script only he could see. I excused myself after an hour, claiming exhaustion. As I walked up the stairs, I could feel them watching. My skin burned with their attention. I closed my bedroom door, leaned against it, and exhaled. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts churned like the water outside. I wasn't naive. I knew what those looks meant. But I also couldn't understand how they felt so entitled in my own home, under my father's roof. I woke up twice. Once to the sound of laughter below, loud and slurred. The second time, it was silent, eerily so. I thought I heard soft steps in the hallway, but when I opened the door, it was empty. Still, I locked it. By morning, everything was reset. Dad made pancakes. The men were cheerful, animated, as though the night before hadn't happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had begun, something unspoken. Tom winked at me as he passed me a plate. Mark accidentally brushed his fingers across mine when handing over a fork. Steven, true to form, said nothing. But his gaze lingered on my neck, my arms, anywhere but my eyes. I didn't say anything to Dad. What could I say? He trusted them. He trusted me. And trust, I was beginning to learn, can blind you to the cracks that are forming right beneath your feet. That day, I went swimming alone. I needed the cold water to clear my head, to silence the rising confusion and the flicker of guilt I didn't yet understand. But even as I floated in the middle of the lake, staring at the clouds, I knew something had shifted inside me. The question wasn't if a line would be crossed. It was when. Here is Chapter 2 of your infidelity story, written to advance the central conflict and deepen character dynamics while maintaining the story's emotional and narrative tension. The next morning unfolded in a haze of cinnamon and coffee. Sunlight poured through the large kitchen windows, casting long golden streaks across the polished wood floor. It looked like any other summer morning, but it didn't feel like one. I sat quietly at the breakfast bar, stirring my coffee more, then drinking it. Dad chatted with Tom and Mark about fishing spots they wanted to revisit, completely oblivious to the glances exchanged behind his back. Only Stephen noticed me watching. His gaze met mine for a moment, calm, unreadable, and too deliberate to ignore. "I've got to head into town," Dad said after breakfast. "Supplies, gas, a few errands, back in a couple of hours." The moment the door shut behind him, the air shifted. Tom was the first to move. He joined me in the kitchen with a smile too relaxed to be innocent. "You always this quiet in the mornings?" he asked, leaning a little too close as he reached for the coffee pot. "I like peace before the noise," I replied, keeping my tone measured. He chuckled. "Well, we could all use a little peace, or maybe just the right kind of distraction." Before I could answer, Mark entered, eating an apple like it was an accessory to his confidence. "Tom's always been the smooth one," he said, eyeing me. "But I think mystery is more attractive." His gaze flicked over me with unspoken suggestion. I took a step back. "I think I'll go read on the porch." They let me go, but their eyes followed like invisible hands brushing against skin. Even as I settled into the porch swing, my pulse ticked too fast. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly where this was heading. But what I couldn't understand, what unnerved me more than their actions, was my own reaction. Beneath the discomfort was a thread of curiosity, thin but unmistakable. By noon, dark clouds gathered above the lake, rumbling with a slow, steady warning. When the storm broke, it did so with full force, thunder cracking, rain falling in thick sheets, and the power flickering out within minutes. "We've got candles in the pantry," Tom offered, already pulling out a wine bottle from the cabinet. "Might as well make it cozy." Candles were lit. The fireplace crackled. Wine flowed too freely. The storm outside felt distant now, replaced by the artificial warmth inside. Somehow, a deck of cards appeared. "Let's play something fun," Mark suggested, eyes dancing with mischief. "Ever played Truth or Dare? Grown-up version?" I hesitated. Stephen spoke for the first time. "We're all adults here." And that was the excuse. That we were all old enough to pretend this was harmless. The game started mild. Truths about childhood crushes. Dares to sip from someone else's glass. But the questions shifted, like the air. Tom dared me to sit on his lap for one round. "Just for laughs," he said. I paused, then sat. Mark asked me to feed him a strawberry, mouth to mouth. I laughed too hard, hoping it would diffuse the moment. But I did it. Stephen said, "Nothing, just watched," his expression unreadable as always. That, somehow, made him the most dangerous. When it was my turn, I picked Dare. Part of me wanted to see how far they'd go. Part of me wanted to know how far I would. "Go up to your room," Tom said softly, "and come back wearing only your robe." I blinked. "Are you serious?" Mark nodded. "We'll close our eyes." Stephen finally spoke. Or not. The room was silent, waiting on my decision. I stood up, slowly, and walked upstairs. In my room, I stared at myself in the mirror. My heart pounded in my chest, not out of fear, but adrenaline. My robe was soft, thin, and barely modest. I knew what this was, a line, and I was about to cross it. When I returned, the room was quiet. No one looked away. I stood there, robe tied, arms crossed, but the silence said more than words could. Tom rose first, walking toward me like a man, entranced. "You didn't have to come back," he murmured, reaching out to touch the edge of my sleeve. But you did, Mark added, standing now as well. Stephen's voice cut through everything. She made her choice. And he was right. What happened next wasn't an accident, not a mistake. It was a decision, complicated, loaded, but mine. Each of them, in their own way, stepped through that door with me. Some moments were slower, tentative, others urgent, claiming. My senses blurred, flashes of skin, heat, breathless silence between words never spoken. When it was over, I lay alone in my bed, the sound of rain tapping gently against the glass. No one said anything, no promises, no blame. And yet, something inside me had unraveled completely. I had let them in, physically, emotionally, all three, and the silence afterward was deafening. The morning after was too quiet. I woke to soft light filtering through my curtains, the lake still and silver under a sky that couldn't decide between sun and storm. For a moment, I lay motionless, listening, for voices, for footsteps, for the sound of consequence. But the house was still. The robe I had worn the night before lay crumpled on the floor. My skin still held the warmth of touch, the memory of overlapping hands, whispered names, a tangled blur of choices made in silence. I got up, dressed slowly, carefully. Not out of shame, but calculation. I needed to be in control now. Downstairs, Stephen was already at the table, drinking black coffee, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said, his tone dry but not cold. "Morning." No mention of the night before, no awkwardness, just that stare, the same one that had followed me from the start, observant, restrained, calculating. I poured myself coffee, acutely aware of the way my hands trembled slightly against the cup. Tom and Mark appeared shortly after, hungover but grinning like boys after a prank. Mark gave me a wink. Tom patted my shoulder like it was some inside joke we were all now in on. "So, what's for breakfast?" Tom asked, stretching with deliberate ease. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. Dad returned around noon. His mood was light, oblivious, thrilled with his haul from town. Fresh bread, meat for the grill, a case of craft beer he'd found on sale. He hugged me, ruffled my hair like I was still 16, and began unpacking groceries with cheerful hums. And I smiled. I played my part, because what else could I do? The rest of the day unfolded like nothing had happened. We played board games, grilled burgers, and laughed at old stories around the fire pit. The storm had passed, both literal and metaphorical, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface, currents stirred. That night, as everyone settled in, I stayed on the back deck, staring out at the lake. I needed clarity, needed to make sense of the unease that had followed me since sunrise. The encounter wasn't just about lust or impulse. It had changed something fundamental inside me. I heard footsteps, not rushed, not hesitant. Stephen, he stood beside me for a moment before speaking. "You think you regret it," he said, not as a question, but a quiet assertion. "I don't know what I feel," I admitted, voice barely audible. "Maybe you're not meant to regret it. Maybe you're meant to understand why you did it." I turned to him, searching his face for judgment, for resentment. There was none, only clarity, a mirror to my own confusion. "You watched me," I said, "from the beginning. I wanted to see who you were before anyone else decided it for you." I swallowed hard, throat tight. "And what did you decide?" He held my gaze for a beat too long. "That you're braver than you think, but you're also playing with something dangerous." There was truth in his words. I felt it burn down to the marrow, because he was right. What had started as curiosity, a subtle power shift, had become something else, something volatile. The next morning, the guests began to pack. Their visit had always been short, just a long weekend, but now it felt like an exodus. Tom clapped, me on the back like we were old friends. Mark gave me a lingering look and a half smile that said, "Don't forget." Stephen simply nodded as he loaded his bag into the trunk. My father saw them off with laughter and promises to do it again soon. He had no idea, and part of me wanted to keep it that way, to protect him, or maybe to protect myself from his disappointment. As the dust settled and their cars disappeared down the gravel road, I stood by the window, coffee cooling in my hand. What I had done couldn't be undone. There were no broken rules, not technically. I wasn't a child. They weren't strangers. And yet, a line had been crossed. Not just once, but 3 times, with 3 men who once felt like family. The silence in the house now felt louder than before. Dad was in the garage, reorganizing. Tools. Life was resuming. But inside me, something had shifted forever. I walked to the lake, shoes in hand, and stepped into the water up to my knees. It was cold, clean, honest. I let it bite my skin. I had let them in, all of them. And yet, it wasn't shame that lingered. It was knowledge, about power, about choice, about the parts of ourselves we don't recognize until the moment we give them permission to surface. Whatever came next, I couldn't pretend to be the same person I was before. The water lapped at my legs as the wind swept across the lake. And in that silence, I didn't ask for forgiveness. I only asked for understanding.